Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Erica and today we'll be in the kitchen making some honey butter biscuits and some homemade apple butter. So we're starting off with homemade apple butter, and this recipe starts with some really good and sweet apples. I headed over to my local, it's like an indoor farmer's market, and I got some apples. They have no wax on them, so they are super fresh. You know that they were just freshly picked, which I really appreciate. And honestly, I can't even remember which apples I picked up. I know I got some galas, and I'm not sure what those big ones are. They might be Honeycrisp, but I'm not totally sure. Regardless, it doesn't matter. Now, this recipe does not require any sugar, so you do want to start with some sweeter apples. That way you don't feel the need to add any sugar, and if you got sweet enough apples, you definitely don't need it. So I got all of those apples washed, and now I'm going to peel all of them. You don't have to do this, but I prefer that. Just like if you're making applesauce, personally I prefer to have the peels off, but that is totally up to you. I think traditionally the peels are removed before making this. So I'm just going to get these all peeled up, and then we will move on to dicing them up. So I've got all the apples peeled, at least for now, and my rule of thumb is 1 apple per 1 cup. So in this recipe, which I'll have linked down below, it calls for 7 cups of diced apples, so that's roughly 1 apple per cup. Now, you saw that really big one at the beginning. That's going to get a little bit more, but in general, that's kind of the rule of thumb. I do end up taking all of those out of the crock pot, and I decided to actually measure them out. Since this isn't a canning recipe, you do not have to make anything precise, so you can do as many as you want. If you just want to fill up your crock pot, go for it. If you want to measure them out like I have in the recipe, that's okay. I ended up doing 14 cups of diced apples, and that gave me a little bit of applesauce and then about 2 pints of the apple butter. So just to give you some reference. And I just cut them into probably 1 inch or 2 inch cubes, and we're getting them into this crock pot. This is a 7-quart crock pot for reference. But yeah, I'm just going to get 14 cups of apples diced up, and then we are going to slow cook this. Next up, we are going to juice 2 lemons and get those mixed in with the apples. This step is totally optional. I do like to do it to preserve the color a little bit, although by the time it's cooked down, it's going to be a lot darker anyway. So you don't have to do this. I think it brightens the flavor a little bit and balances out the sweetness. But again, this part is totally optional. now that we've got our apples and lemon juice in the crock pot, we are going to place the lid on, set it to low, and let it cook down for about 3 to 4 hours. And after 3 to 4 hours, this is what you're going to have. It's going to be, the apples will be really, really soft, and as I'm stirring this, I'm breaking them apart and getting them all mushy. And this is where you've got applesauce, essentially. So if you wanted to sneak a little treat, which I did, and it was so good, you can definitely do that. And you can stop here. You can blend it up, which we will do. You can have smooth applesauce at that point. Or we blend it up and we're going to let it cook some more, which is our main goal. We want apple butter, not applesauce. So I am going to take my hand mixer and get in there and get everything blended up. Now the recipe that I have linked, it tells you to take it out and put it in a blender, which you can definitely do, and it'll give you probably the smoothest texture. However, I no longer have a blender, and I thought this would be a much quicker way, and that way I'm not dirtying much more than those beaters, and it worked out really, really well. So if you don't want to have any more dirty dishes, I recommend you trying this, although make sure that you're careful because you do not want to splash that hot applesauce all over you. So then I am going to add in some cinnamon. I eyeballed this, but put however much you want in there. But this is what makes it extra special. So we've got the cinnamon mixed in, and we're going to place the lid on, and we're going to let it cook down for another couple of hours. And you can see that it has reduced by quite a bit. Now, I would say my apple butter might be a little bit on the thinner side, and that's how I like it. If you wanted it to be thicker, you could keep cooking it down, and it will get thicker. But here is the final result, and it is amazing. It tastes good on so many things, including these honey butter biscuits, and oh my goodness, these are amazing. So in a mixing bowl, we are going to combine 2 cups of all-purpose flour, a tablespoon of baking powder, and a half teaspoon of salt. Now in this recipe, I am using salted butter, which will be coming up shortly. If you are not using salted butter and you're using unsalted butter, then I would suggest using 1 teaspoon of salt. So just a little bit of a variation. Again, this recipe will be linked down below, so make sure you check that out. But we are going to get those combined in a mixing bowl, and then we'll move on to the butter. Now the butter, you are going to want to use super, super cold butter. Leave your butter in the refrigerator until the very last minute, right before you need it. What I like to do is cube it up. So I will cut 3 or 4 ways on one side, do the same on the next side, and then slice it, and I'll show you what that looks like. Some people do like to grate in their butter, so you could use a cheese grater and do that. I personally like to have the bigger chunks of butter in my biscuits because I feel like they are softer and fluffier, but you can decide what you want to do with that. Again, I'm using salted butter here, and then we are going to get that into our dry mixture. And you can use a fork to get this combined. I use a fork for a little bit, and then I use my hands. I feel like using your hands, you can really feel the butter and make sure that you're getting it incorporated how you want it to be. Now, you want the final texture to be kind of a sandy texture. So you want those big chunks of butter in there, because what that's going to do is as they are heated up, the water in the butter is going to release, and that's going to create steam, and that is what's going to give your biscuits a really nice texture. So once you've got that sandy kind of texture, that's when we're going to put in our quote-unquote wet ingredients. So we've got a 1/3 cup of milk, use whatever kind of milk you want, and then a 1/4 cup of honey. And this is where we're starting to incorporate that honey flavor in that, and that's what makes these a little bit on the sweeter side and great to pair with our apple butter. So we'll put the honey and milk in there and then get that mixed together. Now the key also to these, there's a couple keys: really cold butter, big chunks of butter, but then we want to make sure we're not overworking this dough. So I'm just using a fork to incorporate this, and we're going to have a shaggy kind of dough. You don't need it to be like a bread dough or anything like that. It's just a shaggy dough. We're not going to use a rolling pin or anything. We are going to use our hands to shape this. So I'm getting a little bit of flour onto my working surface, and then we'll get our dough onto there. And what we're going to do is kind of a series of things. So I'm going to use my hands to gently press it out into kind of a square shape, and then we are going to fold it. And I'm doing 2 folds per cycle, I guess you could say. So I'm flattening it out, I'm folding it in half, pressing it a little bit, and then we're going to fold it in half again. And we're going to repeat this a couple of different times. And you definitely don't want to overwork this dough, because then your biscuits aren't going to have a really good texture. They're going to be harder. But we want to create a layering, and that's what's going to make these more of like the pull-apart biscuits that you might get in the tube at the grocery store. But trust me when I say these are so much better than store-bought biscuits. So I'm just going to do this a couple of different times, and then we'll be ready to cut out our biscuits. So you can use a biscuit cutter to do that, or just get a mason jar or any kind of glass that you've got and get them cut out. This recipe makes about 8 biscuits or so. You can maybe get a little bit more depending on the size of your cutter, but we're going to get those all cut out, put on a baking sheet to be ready to bake. That last bit of dough I would not recommend using to create a biscuit, because it'll be pretty hard. So I like to give all of my dough to my kids, and they really enjoy playing with it. So now we are going to take these to the oven. We're going to bake them at 425 degrees Fahrenheit for about 8 to 10 minutes until they are golden brown. And now we are going to make a nice little brush on that we're going to brush on our biscuits. So I just did about a tablespoon of honey into a couple tablespoons of butter, and we are going to brush that on all of our biscuits. Again, that's going to get the buttery and honey flavor even more into these biscuits and make them a little bit softer. And here is a quick look inside these biscuits. They're nice and golden brown on the outside and super flaky and soft on the inside. And since they're a little bit sweet, they pair perfectly with our homemade apple butter. And it honestly is a complete treat to have these two paired together. So as I said, both of these recipes will be linked down below, so make sure you check them out. But thank you so much for being here. If you want to see more videos like this, make sure that you hit that subscribe button and that bell notification. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. But thank you so much for being here, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.